Good afternoon, Evil, and I will tell you one story of a good viewing. Dust hung thick in the dim tunnels of the old iron mine like a living veil. Every footstep echoed endlessly against slick rock, magnifying the loneliness that had claimed the subterranean passages for decades. Miners had abandoned the place 20 years ago after a collapse sealed most shafts and sealed something else awake in the dark. No one remembered exactly when the accident happened. One moment, the drills were pounding steadily, the next, a deep, wet crack rolled through the earth and the ground heaved like a living thing. A tunnel collapsed, trapping 3 men alive in a narrow death trap, their frantic radio calls echoing off the walls for only minutes, then falling silent forever. Management quietly sealed the breach, declared the site unsafe, and left. But down below, something stirred. Zira's first memory was of darkness. She tasted rock dust on her tongue, heard the drip of water like slow, distant drums. Her limbs felt gnarled and stiff. As she flexed them, the echoes sounded like bones cracking in a haunted chamber. There was no light, only the distant thrum of unseen geologic pressure. Gradually, her eyes, if such strange orbs could be called eyes, opened to glinting pinpricks of phosphorescence on the rock. She remembered sensation, a cold, clinging dampness that seeped into her skin as if the stone itself were liquefying. She crawled, limbs splayed, each movement stirred a fine mist that glowed briefly where she had been. Tunnel walls narrowed until she scraped through fissures too tight for a man. She felt the old vibrations of miners' machinery, long since silent as a pulsing heartbeat guiding her. In those first hours, she drank only the water that seeped from the seams, thick with iron, tasting of rust and old blood. She felt her body shift subtly, bone and sinew reforming to adapt, claws growing along her fingers. A creature born of subterranean pressure, she was both made and unmade by the mine's collapse. 20 years later, a geologist named Ingrid Larsen organized a new clearance team. The mine's iron yield was rumored to hold enough or to justify reopening. Ingrid led 3 others, Rafael, a brash explosives expert, Naeem, a veteran with a metal detector, and Sherry, a timid surveying assistant. They cracked the seal on the old shaft with modern drills and descended on a Friday morning. At first, everything was predictably grim. Rusted rails snaked away into shadow. Wooden supports groaned under age. Water pooled in shallow basins that reflected the harrowed faces of the newcomers. For 2 days they mapped, measured, and drilled minor test boreholes. Then inscriptions appeared on the walls. At what should have been a junction, Naeem spotted odd scratches, jagged lines forming what looked like crude runes. He traced them with a gloved finger. As his hand passed over, the steel detector on his belt screamed to life with a shrill bleat despite being switched off. He yanked at the device, it jammed in his hand. The others rushed over. The detector clattered on the ground, then rolled to a stop. When Sherry picked it up to silence the alarm, its screen displayed a flickering message, FLE. Rafael laughed it off. Old wiring glitch. But Ingrid frowned. No. Those scratches weren't here when I checked last week. Her lamp beam danced across the walls. Behind her, long shadows seemed to twist unnaturally. They set up camp at the junction. That night, Ingrid awoke to distant tapping, like fingernails against wood somewhere beyond their tents. She roused Naeem. He listened, then shushed her. I think it's breathing. For a moment, they heard it too, a low, rumbling inhalation. Then silence. By dawn, Sherry was missing. Rafael discovered her lamp shattered, lying in a narrow side tunnel. He called her name, only an echo answered. Ingrid's heart began to pound as they followed the lamp's glow toward a dead end. There, smeared on the wall, blood formed the letters, He hunts. Naeem trembled. This mine is cursed. But Rafael set up charges to blast through the rubble and get Sherry out. Ingrid tried to protest, but even she wondered if escape was possible. As Rafael primed the explosives, the air grew colder. Their breath fogged in lamplight. A distant scratch, sharp and deliberate, echoed. The wall behind Rafael convulsed as though something pressed on the other side. He spun around. His headlamp caught a pale handprint, convulsing, blooming red. He staggered back, eyes wild. The explosive went off before Ingrid could stop Rafael. The blast rattled the earth, dust roared, and for an instant, as the echo died, they heard something massive moving, like a great carcass sliding through the dust. A low roar shook the tunnel, reverberating in their chests. Then the lights went out. Panic set in. Ingrid fumbled for her radio, silent. Sherry's name choked in her throat as she realized they were on their own. Rafael tried to steady himself, but his face was pale as chalk. Naeem's detector wailed again, though nothing metal remained nearby. They pressed forward, deeper into darkness, hoping to reach the surface. Instead, they found fresh footprints, long, thin, clawed predictions in the damp sand. They followed, the prints led to a pit. From its depths came a faint scratching. Rafael shone his lantern down, nothing but black. Then something scuttled, too swift to see, and Rafael gasped as the beam caught the glint of countless eyes deep in the pit. Dozens of tiny phosphorescent lights, blinking. Sherry's scream erupted from below. Ingrid stumbled forward, peering over. She saw her colleague's pale face, a rictus of terror as Zira's long, twisted limbs dragged her into a tangle of slick tunnels. Her scream cut off abruptly. Ingrid vomited. Naeem grabbed Ingrid's arm. "We need to run. Now." But Ingrid looked back once more. The blinking eyes in the darkness seemed to wink in unison, inviting, no, daring them to follow. They turned and fled. Every corridor looked the same, walls closing in, shadows dancing at the edge of sight. Behind them, distant roars grew nearer. Rocks fell as though thrown. The ground shook again, urging them on. Somewhere ahead, they heard a voice, Rafael's voice, calling Ingrid's name. It was distant, distorted. She screamed back. He didn't answer. The darkness swallowed her. They rounded a corner into a chamber larger than any they'd seen. Pillars of iron or rose like monoliths. On the far wall, in dripping letters of coagulated rust, was a final message, no escape. Above, the ceiling shifted. Dust rained down as Zira herself emerged, tall, gaunt, skin like cracked shale, eyes glowing with the mind's dying light. Her maw opened to reveal rows of jagged teeth, and her awful voice filled the chamber, a voice that seemed to come from deep within the earth itself. "I have awakened, and you will feed me." Ingrid's blood froze as the last of their lamps died. All around, the mind's heartbeat quickened and the darkness closed in. A tremor ran down Ingrid's spine as Zira's deep, grinding voice faded into oppressive silence. For a heartbeat, the cavern lay still, then the creature lunged. With a thunderous crash of stone, Zira swept toward them, limbs contorting as she ran across the ceiling and down the walls like a grotesque spider. Ingrid and Naeem scrambled backward, backs against a fluted or column, lanterns sputtering feebly. Naeem kicked at Ingrid's leg. "Through the fissure," he hissed, pointing to a narrow crack in the rock face. Dust cascaded from above, spattering them with grit. Together, they wriggled through the shard of a tunnel, leaving Zira's onslaught behind. Their shoulders scraped, bones felt ready to splinter, and all the while, they heard Zira's heavy breaths echoing on the other side. Bursting into a slanted shaft, they tumbled down rungs of an abandoned ladder, sliding past rusted gear and timber supports. The slope ended abruptly at a flooded chamber, water gleaming like liquid night. Ingrid snapped off her lantern and held it aloft, its dying glow outlining Zira's silhouette at the far waterline. The creature paused, nostrils flaring as she sniffed the stale air. Then, with a sickening shriek, Zira bounded forward. Naeem pushed Ingrid into the shallow fringe of the pool. Their limbs plowed through ice-cold water as they quivered past submerged supports. With each stroke, Ingrid's fear roiled. Zira would catch them, tear them apart, and drag them back into the black. Shouts crashed behind them. The water churned, something scraped Ingrid's ankle, a skeletal hand. She kicked free, gasping. Ahead, she glimpsed a ladder ascending into a circular hatch rimmed with moonlight, perhaps an old ventilation shaft that broke to the surface. Summoning every ounce of strength, Ingrid hauled Naeem's arm. He clung to her desperately. Behind them, the water erupted as Zira plunged in, great limbs churning. She pursued in silence, eyes barely above the foam, her gaunt face masked in shadows. They reached the ladder. Ingrid's fingers scrambled for the first rung, nails cracking against the metal. She felt Zira's clawed hand clamp her ankle, jagged nails rending her boot. With a scream, she hauled herself upward, dragging Naeem behind. He managed a single boot on a rung before the creature's weight bore down on them. Bones ached, lungs burned, but Ingrid pulled them free of the water's surface just as Zira's reaching arms snapped closed on air. Climbing the shaft, each rung vibrated under Zira's weight. The mine creaked as if in pain. Dust fell in choking showers. Ingrid's light faded to a dim glow, Naeem's face ashen with tears and exhaustion. They inched upward, rung by rung, their limbs trembling, their hearts hammering. Seconds felt like eternities. The hatch loomed overhead, a circle of freedom. A final cry rattled through the shaft as Zira's hands reached the lip. Ingrid braced her legs, dug her heels into the damp metal, and with one last heave, she and Naeem burst through the hatch into pale, April dawn. They sprawled on grass, the world exploding into sound, birds, wind, and the distant hum of civilization. Gasping, bloody, they lay side by side. Behind them, deep in the shaft, a breath. A low hiss like steam escaping a boiler. They turned, lanterns now useless in daylight, but saw the hatch shudder. Zira's head, that nightmare visage, edged over the rim, sunlight catching her cracked skin, her eyes glowing with the mine's greenish phosphor. The hatch buckled under her weight. Then, as if heedless of the warmth of day, she recoiled, severing her own arm in a spray of coal-black blood. With a guttural snarl, she retreated into the darkness, dragging her stump back into the shaft. The lid snapped shut by unseen hands below, and the earth swallowed the entrance once more. The two survivors stared in disbelief as the hatch settled flush with the ground. Minutes later, their rescue team arrived, search dogs baying, torches flickering among the pines. Ingrid and Naeem staggered to the waiting medics, voices trembling as they tried to recount how Zira had emerged only to shy from the sun's light. The rescuers exchanged puzzled glances. The hatch they sought was gone, vanished as though never there. In the days that followed, newspapers splashed the story. Mine reopens, two trapped, rescued miraculously. Some marveled at Ingrid's courage, others whispered of gas pockets and delirium. But Ingrid knew the truth. At night, she heard the faintest scratching at her window, dry, insistent. And when she looked, she swore she saw a phosphorescent glow slithering among the trees. Naeem, confined to a hospital bed with torn ligaments and shock, drew the scratches he'd seen in the tunnel, the runes that spelled FLEE, he hunts, no escape, on scraps of paper. He taped them above his bedside lamp. "We can't forget," he told Ingrid. She nodded, fingers tracing each jagged rune as though Zira's presence still pulsed through the glyphs. Weeks later, the mine's owners announced full-scale operations would resume. Heavy machinery rolled into the valley, a ribbon of flattened earth led back to the sealed entrance. Ingrid tried to warn them, told them of Zira's awakening, the creature born of collapse and iron. But the promise of profit drowned her pleas. The mine's reopening ceremony was scheduled for a bright morning in June. On June 12th, as dignitaries gathered by the hatch, a low tremor shivered through the crowd. The ground quaked, dust rose in choking columns, and a scream that was half earthquake, half animal howl ripped through the assembly. The hatch burst open, soil and stone spraying outward, and Zira emerged, taller and more horrifying than before, limbs thick with gore, jaw unhinged, eyes burning like green-hot embers. The dignitaries scattered in panic. Security scrambled to hold her back, but bullets glanced off her carapace of shale. Zira's roar shattered windows, snapped steel beams like twigs, and sent shockwaves rolling across the valley. Ingrid stood frozen, clutching Naeem's runic sketches. She realized with bone-deep certainty that Zira would not be stopped by man or machine. By nightfall, the mine lay in ruin, fences twisted, trucks overturned. Survivors spoke of a creature born of Earth's fury, a sentinel of darkness with a hunger that no explosion could quell. When they found Ingrid, she stood before the shattered hatch, tears mixing with soot. In her hand was a single rune, drawn fresh in iron-rich blood, "I rule below." The valley fell silent again. Machines lay silent as tombstones. And beneath the shattered earth, in the caverns of cracked ore, Zira's laughter echoed, a low, resonant mirth that promised the world would tremble at the sound of her claim. Eternally, she would slumber and awaken, each collapse feeding her growing power, a creature born of stone and death, destined to reign in the shadowed depths forevermore. Thank you very much. See you all in the next video.